We'll do sound check later.
Welcome to KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., and welcome to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. It's been one heck of a news day, and I can't think of anyone better to join me on our talk show than Dr. Carlos Hill. Dr. Hill is Regents Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African and African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Hill is the author of 3 books: Beyond the Rope, The Impact of Lynching on Black Culture and Memory, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History, and the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, a photographic history. Dr. Hill founded the Tulsa Race Massacre Oklahoma Teachers Institute to support teaching the history of the race massacre to thousands of middle school and high school students. He also serves on the boards of the Freedom Center Planning Committee, the Clara Luper Legacy Committee, and the Board of Scholars for Facing History and Ourselves, and is actively engaged on other community initiatives working toward racial justice. In the first hour, I want to talk with Dr. Hill about the penny verdict. I want to talk with him about the future of Kamala Harris. Will she run for governor? Will she run for president in 2028? These are factors that consume our lives, and the reaction to the penny verdict, including Mrs. Gardner, Eric Gardner's mother, says that there are 2 systems of justice. Dr. Carlos Hill, welcome to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Dr. Hill, we need to unmute Dr. Hill.
I am unmuted, and
Hi, Dr. Hill. How are you?
I am great. Thank you for having me. I am good. Thank you for having me once again.
I'm honored that you're on my program, and you always know that you're welcome back.
Thank you.
Dr. Hill, why don't we begin with the politics, the soft stuff, and then go into the more difficult challenges that confront African Americans at this hour. Kamala Harris, what does she do next?
I think she takes a break. Kamala has done so much service for our democracy, serving under Joe Biden for the last 4 years. And before that, she was doing amazing work as senator. And so I think she has done her part. She has done her bit. But I hope she has a future, a bright future within the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris won 75 million votes. That's not easy to do.
Not at all.
75 million. I want to say that 75 million votes. Donald Trump won about 78 million. And so I believe that she has a bright future. But what will she do? Will she run for governor in 2026? Some in her camp believe that that's the best way possible. Some believe that she should pause a gubernatorial run and rather save all her eggs for running in 2028, because she would possibly have a much better chance building on that 75 million votes that she's earned in the 2024 election. And we know the 2024 election had some very, very, I would say, historic factors that contributed to Trump's victory, perhaps. And so I think she should do what she should get some rest, but I think she should consider herself having a bright future in the Democratic Party. And I hope it's as running for, or at least competing in 2028 for the office of president in the Democratic nomination.
So I have a slightly different take, and I know we're going to mix it up for the next hour, and I look forward to that, right?
Hey.
I think she should not take her foot off the gas. I think she should stay right in national politics. And if she consumes a lot of energy to become governor of California, In a real sense, she may be saying no to 2028, right? And then that makes 2032 more difficult, in my opinion, because she will have relinquished a $1 billion fundraising list and turned the Democratic Party over to whomever does run in 2028, if it is not her. She has the party. I mean, I feel like Eminem. You got one. Well, actually, you got two shots. You got two shots. You got to take it. While you can, right?
Yeah.
So I say that given the examples that I've had, like I've seen Reagan run for president 3 times. I've seen my father run for president twice. I've seen Bill Clinton stick his neck across the fence a few times, but he stayed in the game. And what I'd like to see is Kamala Harris exert herself and her followers at the DNC. I'd like to see her take over the party's infrastructure. Think about this. There are 4 NAACP conventions between now and when the 2028 campaign comes around again. She has to speak at all of them. Mm-hmm. There are 4 SCLC conventions and 4 Martin Luther King Jr. birthdays to be in Atlanta. There are 4 AFL-CIO conventions where obviously she would be welcomed. There are the midterm elections, and literally a couple of hundred congressmen who need the former Democratic nominee to show up in those congressional districts and encourage their campaigns and help them get reelected. So I have a slightly different take. Mix that up with me for a moment.
Well,
why California?
I mean, I want her to stay involved because I think she can remain a very integral and really important part of national politics by being governor of California. She can do it by, as you mentioned, perhaps taking control of the party apparatus or convincing the party, right, that she is the best candidate going forward because of her donor list and because of the relationship she's built in the last 100 days and moving forward. That puts her in a really strong position. But with that being said, there are other people out there. There are other candidates who have followings, who have, I'm thinking of up and coming politicians such as a Wes Moore, a Maryland governor, who has a lot of charisma and who has progressive leadership. He's someone that I think with national attention, his stocks will raise as we get closer to 2028. So I think you're right. She's in a strong position, but there are others like a Wes Moore up and coming in a strong position who will challenge her and will force her to be, perhaps stronger on some of the issues that she is right now. That's what I perceive for her.
I think that's a legitimate case. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. This is the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on KBLA Talk 1580. When we come forward, we'll be back with Dr. Carlos Hill.
To bring you up to speed on the news of the day. You're listening to Jesse Jackson Jr. only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Somebody bring out the confetti, baby!
Starting Monday, January 6th, KBLA Talk 1580 has a new midday lineup.
I'm excited.
Are you ready for Tavis Smiley, Dr. Cornel West, Jesse Jackson Jr., D.L. Hughley, and E. Quarterly Corte back-to-back?
Oh, my God.
Are you really ready for all this smoke?
I'm ready, brother.
Yes, we still have Dominique DePrima in the mornings and Zoe Williams in the evenings, but middays just got lit on KBLA Talk 1580.
We on fire.
All across America, people are talking about our new midday lineup. Starting Monday, January 6th, our KBLA 1580 app downloads are on fire because everybody's going to be tuning in.
Yes, I love you guys. You are the bomb.
Now would be a good time to hit up SMB at KBLA1580.com if you want folks to hear about your business or brand. That's SMB at KBLA1580.com. It's going up in 2025 on KBLA Talk 1580.
It's going up.
That's what I want.
Hey, Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about some new COVID information I saw online.
Uh-huh.
I read that 3 out of 4 adults in the United States have a high risk factor for severe COVID-19. And Black folks like us with certain conditions like diabetes, heart disease, mental health conditions, or being 50 and older are at high risk.
Boy, you sound like a commercial.
I'm just saying. I know you love your ginger teas and essential oils, but remember, there are treatment options for COVID-19.
I promise if I get sick again, I'll call my doctor to ask about my options.
On your period, sudden gushes happen without warning. But now you can say goodbye to stand-up gush fears thanks to Always Ultra Thins with rapid dry technology. It absorbs gushes 2 times faster than the leading store brand and gives you up to 100% leak-free protection. Hello, clean and comfortable with Always Fear No Gush.
Our daughter Jessie loves playing detective.
A clue.
But since we discovered she has sensitive skin, we've been playing detective too.
We thought the problem was our puppy.
But it was actually our old detergent.
Aha.
So we switched to Tide Free and Gentle. Tide cleans better than the leading competitive free detergent, and it doesn't leave behind irritating residues.
Plus, Tide Free and Gentle has no dyes or perfumes, so it's gentle on her skin.
Case closed.
If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide Free and Gentle.
I occasionally have nerve discomfort in my hands, so the things I love to do
Let's play something, Grandma.
became difficult as I got older.
If you have occasional stabbing and burning in your hands and feet, try Nervive Nerve Relief. Nervive's clinically studied dose of alpha-lipoic acid reduces occasional nerve discomfort in as little as 7 days with continued daily use. Say yes to healthy nerves with Nervive Nerve Relief. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure,
Now back to more of
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA Talk 1580. Welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our special guest is Dr. Carlos K. Hill. Dr. Hill is an African-American professor of African-American studies. And we were having a conversation just before the break on the future of Kamala Harris. Dr. Hill, before the break, you mentioned other names. We've got 2 African-American women who are in the United States Senate from the northeastern states. We have Maryland's governor that you mentioned before, the Wes Moore, that you mentioned before the break. But they're not tested nationally, quite like Kamala Harris. Your thoughts, Dr. Hill, on the mountain they would have to overcome to be successful in a presidential campaign in 2028?
I'm not sure if it's a mountain. But I think back to other candidates that did not have national experience, but a lot of charisma. I think of Barack Obama. I even think of even before Barack Obama, Democratic candidates that rose to the top. Even a Bill Clinton that didn't have national exposure, but charisma and the politics to match the time, kind of propelled them to the forefront. I can see that happening for a politician like a Wes Moore. He's not the only one, but I think because he won Maryland, right, a state that is a contested state that can go Republican, that can go Democrat, he's showing that he can win in a state that's competitive, right? He can win in a state that has national implications, right? And also, so far so good, right? The people of Maryland, seemingly he has a good voter approval rating. So all these things to me suggest that even with little experience, right, because of the political climate that we in, social media and all the ways in which clips can go viral, you can overcome an experience because of the ways that our political culture works today. So
As you know, in 2008, I was one of the national co-chairmen of Barack Obama for president. In fact, I was national co-chairman of his campaign with the late Senator Paul Simon to be a United States Senator from the state of Illinois. So I have some sense of the real estate that these candidates have to cover. What is your thinking about whether or not, after this election defeat, one, African-American candidates are at a disadvantage because of Kamala Harris's loss in 2024? And how do African-American candidates appeal to Dixie, that is, red America, and convince them what seemingly we were unable to convince them this time, and that is we speak to their true economic interests?
I mean, I think for Black people, Black Americans, we're always at a disadvantage, right?
Yes.
Because we are such a small portion of the population. Our numbers, even if we voted in unison, all of us, it wouldn't necessarily change the outcome of an election if the dynamics aren't in our favor to be a swing vote. And so for me, even in the best of times, right, if we were completely unified around a political program, it would not necessarily mean that it would be implemented, that things would change because of our unity. And so I think, given that reality, and that's for me the baseline reality, I think we have to focus on our politics. What are the issues that are going to really drive substantive change in the Black community, and center those issues, whether or not we can get Dixie or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to go along with it, right? Because no matter what, we're going to be at a disadvantage if the math doesn't work in our favor. And in most elections, it doesn't. And so my focus, my emphasis is always centering the needs, the political needs, social economic needs of the Black community, irregardless of the politics of the time, because we might not necessarily benefit from them. And so we better than in that situation focus on what really matters. I hope that answers your question.
Well, you've given tremendous thought and reflection to the context. And when I speak of a mountain to overcome, we're at 2028 in some of our thinking, but the other side of it is we have 4 years to weather Donald Trump. And it's clear Donald Trump plus the Supreme Court could overturn Brown versus the Board of Education for you in that period. They could also undermine the Voting Rights Act of 1965 during that period, leaving a less fertile ground for our politics going forward. And so while Trump may be term limited by 2028, I certainly get the impression that racial politics has been normalized in such a way that even poor white folks vote against their own economic interests when it comes to MAGA and the cult of personality that he has created. There's no such cult of personality in the Democratic Party. Is that a mountain that we can overcome 4 years from now?
The racial politics of America, the ways in which a demagogue like Donald Trump will use, let's not say the Southern strategy, let's just say direct appeals to racism, whether it's Southern voters or Northern voters, just American voters. Can we overcome that? No, we cannot, right? And this election proved that, right? Do as much as one can to fan the flames of race, and at the very end of the election, Donald Trump talking about Black immigrants eating dogs, right? Creating this controversy, right? We are repelled by that, but those are the direct pills to race. And I believe those are the things that help to drive, right, people to the polls for Donald Trump, right? His direct appeals to race. So I don't think we can overcome them, but we have to do something to counterbalance.
As a historian on the Tulsa race massacres, there must have been an unease that you felt when you heard that direct appeal about the dogs and the cats, Springfield, Ohio, and the mass deportation of Haitians. What are the signals and concerns that you observed in the campaign that we should look out for in the future?
In 2016, Donald Trump sort of did wink winks at neo-Nazi groups, white supremacist groups. In 2024, And we criticized him for it, particularly in and around the Charlottesville moment. Fast forward to 2024, there is no longer sort of these soft pedaling of these groups. Now he calls them by name. Now he calls them political supporters. And so that's where the normalization has happened, right? What used to be, taboo, I can only kind of sort of gingerly talk about them. Now I can call them my supporters. Now those individuals who sacked the Capitol, they are my supporters. I am going to liberate those who've been put in. You can see how the normalization, not just of political violence, but racial violence, is really worrying to me, because what happens when we begin to make direct appeals? What happens when we begin to not just pander to, but say that those groups are representative? We see rise in violence, anti-Black violence, but not just anti-Black, violence against Jews, Jewish people, violence against immigrants, violence against Mexican people. All the violence, right, is racial, right? When we make direct appeals, right, to race, and why we need to either, right, have, more gun laws, why we need to have more restrictive immigration laws. All these come down to appeals to race, right? And so can we overcome it? I'm not sure, because in recent memory and recent history, we haven't shown that we can. But still in all, I think there are things that we can do to counterbalance if we stay focused on the prize.
Eric Gardner's mother is decrying today two systems of justice in the murder of Jordan Neely and the choking incident that included, obviously, Daniel Penny, who attended the Army-Navy game with President Trump and President-elect Trump and President-elect J.D. Vance. You've given a considerable amount of study to the murder of Emmett Till. And I should say that when I was growing up, Mamie Till Mobley, I live on 71st and Emmett Till Boulevard right now. That's where I live. And I knew Mamie Till Mobley, and she used to come and listen to my father speak on Saturday mornings. When you saw and heard about the murder of Jordan Neely, were you concerned that we may be entering into an environment where this kind of vigilantism becomes more commonplace?
Well, I think the killing of Black people, whether it's by the police or private citizens, happens every day. It's only typically the cases that are captured on film and then posted to social media that go viral that seemingly gain our attention, right? And so when we think about violence against Black bodies, Black people, it is a daily occurrence, whether it's private violence, typically white people, shooting or harming Black people due to racial profiling, and or police doing the very same thing, right? We could talk about violence that occurs within our community, the Black community, but when we're talking about violence that stems from racism, racial discrimination, racial antagonism, right, it's clear that there hasn't been an uptick. It's just a changing same in terms of violence, right? The levels of Black violence ebb and flow, but the persistence of it remains, right? And so what do we do in that situation, right? I live in Oklahoma City, right? I live in a city that has had in recent years a rise in gun violence. What has Oklahoma City as a community done to try to stem that violence, right? It's organized itself to de-escalate violence that happens in the community. And because of organizations that have done that de-escalation work, we've seen a decline in gun violence within the Black community, right? And the organizations responsible for that, Live Free OKC, should be commended for that work. So even with the rise of violence, right, racial violence and just gun violence, there are things that we can do. I don't want to suggest that there aren't things that we can't do.
When I reflect upon your work, particularly your study of Emmett Till and what we saw in the Daniel Penny Jordan Neely event, is in both cases there's a jury, right? A jury of New Yorkers did not see what we saw and what we felt, right? In the Emmett Till case, the perpetrators were killed. I'm sorry, the perpetrators were tried for Emmett Till, and another jury didn't see or feel what we felt in the death of Emmett Till. I know we have about 1 minute and a half before we come forward. Your comment on the system of justice that does not honor Black life.
Well, we have to go deeper. The system of justice doesn't have a record of having compassion for Black life, but that is American culture. That is American culture rooted in lynching culture. And I could talk for hours about lynching culture. I got a minute. Lynching culture revolved around discounting the value of Black life because Black people could be lynched in public, brutally murdered in public with hundreds of whites watching, and there be no justice and no compassion, right? And so we've never dealt with that lack of compassion for Black death and for violence against Black people. And so for me, it's just an echo of Emmett Till, the ways in which in 1955 we didn't have compassion for Black people who were murdered by white racists. We don't have that compassion today because we've never dealt with the fact that we lynched 5,000 Black people, and no Black person that was lynched ever received justice.
Dr. Hill, when we come forward, we're going to be talking about culture and the nature of Black life. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA 1580. Talk will come forward in just a moment.
You're riding with Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 things you should know from BIN News. The White House says President Biden has been briefed on the school shooting in Madison, Wisconsin. African-American Police Chief Sean Barnes says 3 people are dead and several are injured after the shooting at a K-12 Christian school. He adds one of the deceased is believed to be the juvenile shooter who was a student at the school. Black New York City Mayor Eric Adams says he's not worried about being denied public matching funds for his 2025 re-election bid. Adams told news reporters during a City Hall Q&A on Monday that his campaign has plenty of money. Bernard Johnson is set to become El Paso, Texas' new mayor after Saturday's runoff. Johnson will become El Paso's first Black mayor. And the Jackson State University Tigers are now the new national champions of Black college football. They achieved the prestigious honor Saturday by winning the Celebration Bowl 28-7 against South Carolina State University at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 at BINnews.com.
Police activity in North Hollywood is messing up surface streets in the area of Vineland and Hortense. Southbound lanes of Vineland at Hortense is where a pursuit came to an end, and now traffic is just a big mess trying to make your way southbound especially. That drive is backing up all the way from Camarillo Street. Looks like they're just trying to get Vineland cleared out. The northbound side also a mess from Landale heading to the 134, and it looks like Lancashire is a great alternate for you. A lot of people seem to be taking that at this time. Let's look at the drive on the 5 in Burbank. Southbound slowing away from Alameda. Delays taking you ahead all the way to the 605. And in Orange County, the 55 northbound delays out of Irvine from the 405 freeway all the way to the 5 and ahead from the 22 to the 91.
This holiday season, choose treatment and recovery for opioid or stimulant addiction and embrace new beginnings, the company of family and friends, and create special moments. Find a proven treatment provider near you at choosechangeca.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
For the 4th straight week, the UCLA women's basketball team is ranked number 1 in the country. The 10-0 Bruins have been number 1 since beating defending national champion South Carolina on November 24th. The Bruins have a home game tonight against Cal Poly. Joining UCLA in the top 5 this week is South Carolina, Notre Dame, UConn, and LSU. USC is 7th. Next game for the 10-1 Trojans is Saturday at UConn. Congratulations to Notre Dame football coach Marcus Freeman. Notre Dame gave Freeman a 4-year contract extension that will keep him at the school for the next 6 years. Notre Dame is 11-1 this season. Notre Dame plays Tavis Smiley's Indiana Hoosiers Friday in the first round of the college football playoffs. Freeman is one of only 2 black head coaches in the 12-team playoffs. He joins Penn State's James Franklin. Penn State has a first-round game Saturday against Southern Methodist. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Yeah, y'all, come on. Pick up the drums.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we fight the power every day.
Yeah, gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey.
I listen to KBLA and I love the commercials. I know what the commercials mean. I also, if I'm looking and trying to figure something out, I need something to talk to me that might hit me. And it happens on TV because, you know, every time they show a sporting event, they got the pharmaceutical companies back to back to back telling people how to fix the sickness on the same stuff that they sell them. So we get it.
Yep, we get it too, Chuck D. And that's why at KBLA Talk 1580, we don't black down.
Drop it. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. Fight the power.
Environmental justice is racial justice.
Environmental justice is social justice.
This is KBLA Talk 1580.
Tips to help improve basic steps for building a budget in 2024. Building a budget can help you achieve and reach your financial goals. With a budget, you can keep track of your spending, avoid and get out of debt, limit overspending, pay bills on time, and build solid savings habits. What's the best way to get started? Figure out how much to set aside for expenses like rent, mortgage, bills, groceries, and entertainment. Understanding your past financial habits can help you make the proper adjustments for your budget. Adjusting to a budget can take time as you work to find the right balance, but keep working on it. For more financial health tips, visit chase.com or stop by a local branch. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 is committed to self-care and community well-being. Walk Good LA was formed in June 2020, inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and the beginning stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. What began as a few minutes of breath work and yoga meditation before protests against police brutality turned into a safe space for the community to heal in hard times. The immensely positive response from the community transformed the momentum into a movement. Today, Walk Good LA is a Black and Brown-led community wellness organization based in Los Angeles. They provide spaces for healing through community yoga classes, guided meditations, hikes, run clubs, and other activations throughout Los Angeles that attract hundreds of members weekly. With the help of Propel and Michael B. Jordan, they now have a yoga and wellness studio in Los Angeles called the Walk Good Yard. To join their mailing list and connect with healing spaces, please visit walkgoodla.org. That's walkgoodla.org. Or find them on Instagram at walkgoodla. This is a community call to action, a community call to healing from KBLA.
Welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on KBLA Talk 1580. Dr. Carlos Hill is Regents Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African and African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He is my guest this evening. Dr. Hill, just before the break, we were talking about the impact of lynching on Black culture and memory. And you spoke of Emmett Till. We talked about Tulsa. You talked about Charlottesville. Tell us about the trauma that the idea of lynching is having on African Americans.
I should be better prepared today, Brother Jackson.
No, you are doing fantastic. We both struggle with this mute button. I told I told the producers I'm not touching no buttons during this show. Leave it on.
Yes.
Y'all can turn my laptop off.
Well, dear brother, I'm going to take your advice and not unmute anymore, but or mute myself anymore. But let's talk about it. I am a historian of lynching and racial violence. I spend my time teaching about the history of lynching and racial violence. I don't just teach about it. I try to bear witness to the history of lynching. What that means is I try to center lynch victims in the telling of the history of lynching. And so if we do that, and that's what we don't do in America, we don't center the victims, we center the mob. If we centered the victim, who they were in life, if we center the victim and what happened to them in death, we would have more justice for lynching victims in this country, right? I mentioned 5,000 lynching victims, and all of them we have documented as Black. By way of the Equal Justice Initiative, we have documented those numbers. We can say nearly 5,000 Black Americans lynched, but nonetheless, zero white person, white mob held accountable. So imagine what that does. So think about George Floyd, how much relief there was when there was a semblance of justice, because we all saw what happened
with our own eyes.
With our own eyes. And imagine in 5,000 lynchings, seeing with your own eyes that a mob killed a Black person in public, and they took pictures of it and they celebrated it, and none of those individuals ever being held accountable. Actually, the opposite happening. That's the trauma of lynching. And that's how lynching shows up today in Black Americans' lack of faith in the system. That justice will ever, because in at least 5,000 murders of Black people in public, there was no justice. For Emmett Till, the most famous Black lynch victim in American history, a child 14 years old, the individuals who lynched him, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, only months after the trial, said they did it, and there was no justice. And so that is the collective trauma of lynching on Black people. No accountability, no compassion for Black suffering. That is the trauma of lynching, and that is what we have not dealt with in this country. When George Floyd was murdered and the world paid attention, for the first time it felt like Black people who suffer violence mattered. That's the first time.
Can I be the devil's advocate? Let me be the devil's advocate for our listeners today. So there is this reaction for the lack of accountability when there is white on Black violence. But when there's Black on Black violence, we may not call it lynching, but it seems like our accountability standards change. In other words, we're in an uproar because of the history of lynching, that is racial violence. But when it comes to Black on Black violence, us killing each other, our community selling drugs within our community to our children or on our streets, the outrage and the uproar isn't the same as racial violence. Is that a reaction, how we treat each other, a reaction to the external force of white violence and terror? Or do we turn around, embody that violence and that terror, and then inflict it on our own?
Well, we're going to have a conversation here.
That's what we're doing now. That's what we're doing.
but I want to break this down. I would say Black intellectuals like myself, Black community leaders that I organize with, we care deeply about suffering of Black people, whether it's at the hands of a Black person or someone else. The root of why Black people or the interracial violence is very different from white on Black violence or violence that's rooted in racial oppression. Right. So
Absolutely.
we cannot try to talk about them in the same breath. They're just different phenomenon, right? But we can say that in some cases, the violence that Black people commit against other Black people is rooted in the systemic oppression, right? The desperation that Black people find themselves in the inner city, right? The lack of jobs, the lack of education, the lack of opportunity, ultimately, and the ways in which desperation can cause conflict, violence, etc. We have to acknowledge that, but we can't talk about those things as one and the same. They are not. Right. And, and for me, someone who not only teaches about Black people, but loves Black people and is committed to serving Black people, and I work with people to do the same, we care just as much, right, about anti-Black violence committed by white races as violence that happens within the community that stems from interpersonal issues. I mentioned earlier, Live Free OKC. This is an organization in Oklahoma City devoted to de-escalating conflict in the community because the community cares about that violence. It's not an either or. We're going to show up and protest when a person is shot by the police, but when somebody is killed in the community at the hands of a Black person, we don't. No, that is not a reality that I have seen, that I have witnessed anywhere. But that is a narrative, and I'm here to say that we should stop talking like that.
I don't disagree with you at all. We're about a minute and a half out of the break. My question for you is it possible that the psychological consequences have become embodied in us in such a way that if I go to work in white corporate America, I feel some kind of way as an African American man working my way up through the corporate structure. But then at the end of the day, I come home very paternalistic, taking my anxiety, my angst, all that I've been through during the course of the day. I take it out on someone I love, someone I care about, my wife, my spouse, my significant other, my partner. We come home bringing the tension of what it means to be Black in the corporate structure, in the government structure. We return home and we bring a kind of burden that is so heavy that we, in effect, we lash out at each other. We lash until we get back downtown, until we get back on the job, and then we're almost shuffling by comparison to what we've brought home. Anyway, that's just my initial thinking on the subject. We have about 30 seconds before the break, Dr. Hill.
I would say that we cannot at all discount the impact that racism and historical racism has on Black Americans. I've heard a quote: racism can kill you fast, racism can kill you slow. And racism killing you slow is the everyday microaggressions that occur and how we respond to them. And so much of fighting racism is figuring out how we as Black people respond to it, react to it in productive ways, healthy ways.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA Talk 1580. Our guest is Dr. Carlos Hill. When we come forward.
practices. Visit worksafewithsilica.org. This is a message from Cal OSHA.
Hey, John, why so glum?
I just got let go. The company's downsizing. This is the third time in the last 2 years. I'm done with this.
Have you thought about My Computer Career? I've heard they can train you for a career in IT in just a few months, including cybersecurity and the basics. Now that's a recession-resistant career.
Wow, thanks. I'll check them out.
Go to mycomputercareer.edu and take the free career evaluation. mycomputercareer.edu. Financial aid is available for qualified students, including the GI.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. The Autopsy Initiative provides a second autopsy free of charge for victims' families who have lost their loved ones due to a police-related death. The services offered through the initiative include the completion of a second autopsy, disclosure of preliminary findings, and a final autopsy report. A police-related death is when an individual is harmed by police officers using deadly force, which results in an individual's death. Police-related death includes in-custody deaths, including those that arise during contact with law enforcement officers during arrest, pursuit, booking, transport, or incarceration. The Autopsy Initiative has a team of board-certified pathologists on call. An autopsy request may be completed by anyone with a close relationship with the victim, which may include the victim's spouse, partner, relative, close friend, or lawyer. To request a free second autopsy for a victim of police violence, please visit knowyourrightscamp.com. That's knowyourrightscamp.com. Then click on Autopsy, then click on Request. At KBLA, we believe in justice for victims of police violence. We say their names, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA.
Welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on KBLA Talk 1580. My special guest is Dr. Carlos Hill. Dr. Hill, let me shift gears for a moment. We have had another mass shooting at a school in Wisconsin, and there's almost a numbing effect. There's so many of them. They're so frequent. And the news today has been dominated by this particular shooting. I think the last I checked, a teacher had been killed. The assailant looks like may have killed herself, and several other students may very well have lost their lives as well. Your initial thoughts on gun violence in the schools?
Well, my initial thought is, as we always say when these incidents happen, when these tragic incidents happen, my heart goes out to the family. But my heart really does go out because, I have 11-year-old twins. And the question on my mind, besides sympathy for the families who've lost, is in a country that refuses to have gun laws or even minimal protections like assault weapon bans and universal background checks, like basic things, in a country that refuses to do that, commonsensical things, not banning weapons, but commonsensical things. What it appears to me is that no amount of mass shootings, gun violence will change our gun laws. And so we as parents, we as citizens just have to figure out, how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our children at school, given that our governments will not pass laws, will not do anything to make us safer or protect? So we have to, as citizens, start to say what we can do, not what the government will do, not what our school will do, but what can we do as communities, right? Not individuals, but as communities, to protect ourselves in ways that our government won't, because of this political, I don't even know what to call it at this point, idiocy. I don't know.
So a certain pattern, at least for me, emerges here, right? It's thoughts and prayers. It's a tragedy. It's get to the motive of the shooter. It's a call for stronger gun laws, guns that seemingly end up, you call it idiocy, that seemingly end up in the hands of children. And then it arrives at the mental health of an individual that no local police department can anticipate. So then the first responders show up. And in one case, in another city, they didn't show up at all. They kind of waited. But then when the aggressive first responders show up to try and normalize the situation, usually it's over. But it always ends up at mental health. So we ask for either stronger gun laws, or we ask for law enforcement's presence, or more guns for law enforcement. We ask for hardening schools with metal detectors and other forms of the militarization, if you will, the hardening of the school itself. But we never get to the core of a troubled individual who is sitting next to us in class, right? Someone who is struggling at home, someone who had a bad night, someone who was abused last night, someone who has shown us micro signs of aggression at every step of their personality, but we missed every single detail because, oh, she'll be all right, or he'll be all right, he's just having a bad day. Well, that bad day quickly escalates into a horrible day for everyone on the receiving end when that individual pops. Is there another approach to mental health amongst our children in the school system that we ought to be considering?
It's hard to say. What I can see, and I'm not an expert in these areas, but I am a parent, and as a parent of 11-year-old children, I can speak to what I am seeing in school culture and so forth. I think it's a really multifaceted problem. But I think at its root is what researchers have shown in terms of social media is that children are utilizing it because of loneliness, and in utilizing social media so much, in ways that highlight, maybe their isolation, may highlight the ways in which they're different from their friends, and they get bullied and so forth. That we're living in an age where kids just need to be checked on more, because there's so many places where they're getting influenced digitally and at school that it's hard to know, where is it coming from? Is it school? Is it online? Is it abuse happening in the home? And so the only way that we can really in any way have preventative, be able to prevent that, is touch those students more ultimately. And when I say touch, I mean check in with those students, try to understand what's going on with those students, and not, as you would say, leave it to when there is a crisis. Now we ask the questions. We should be asking the questions, as you mentioned, all along the way, because that's the only way that you're ever going to catch some of these or de-escalate some of these situations before they occur.
When I was studying martial arts, and I've studied martial arts for more than 30 years, one of my instructors, an instructor by the name of Cameron Shane, a founder of a system called Budokan, used to tell us when we engaged in the art that we needed to pay attention to intention. We needed to pay attention to every bodily function. Every movement is done with intentionality. From the moment we wake up, we don't just brush the first 4 teeth that the toothbrush touches. You have to go up and down the back on both sides. Then you have to go inside of your mouth. You have to pay attention to the intentionality of everything that you do. Every step that you take, pay attention. And I just don't get the impression that our students are actually paying attention to their intentions. And so in our final 2 minutes in this segment, mindfulness. is what I want to talk about in the next hour. Dr. Hill, I hope you can hang around with me as long as you possibly can. Mindfulness, mental health check-in at the beginning of the day ought to be something that factors into the school day and the curriculum. Check on your neighbor.
I would say that I have centered mindfulness in my teaching. You can ask any of my students the first question that Dr. Hill asks in each class, every class is, how do you feel today? How does your spirit find you? And I go around each of my 35 students and ask them, how is their spirit? And if someone says I'm depressed, we stop and we say, why are you depressed? Can you talk to us about it? And that's the first 15 minutes of class, checking in with them. Because for me, my teaching revolves around making sure the students understand that they are seen and heard, right? And when students feel that they're seen and they're heard, that creates the conditions for which they can learn.
Maybe we should begin the school day with a mindfulness hour, maybe a mental health check-in. Empathize with your neighbor hour. Sounds like the beginning of a day for me and for all of us. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. on KBLA Talk 1580. Thank you, Dr. Carlos Hill, for joining us. Until we return.
Thank you for having me.